video in which we'll be sewing together the pattern for the Osaka shopping bag. This is a one-size pattern for a tote bag. The bag can also be used for other purposes, for everyday activities or as a beach bag. It features large pockets for storage on the outside front and on the inside back to balance the load. The bag has been designed with 2 overlapping handles, long ones for shoulder carrying, above short ones for lifting and carrying by hand. The bag is wide and rather flexible, as it is not lined. It folds easily for storage. The finishes are very neat, with cotton wool ribbons to trim the edges, but bias binding could be used instead. The bag is sewn with strong folded seams to join the bottom to the rest of the bag, and French seams on the inside at the bottom of the bag. An optional carabiner clip can be added to hold keys. The bag has been designed to be open, without fastenings, for greater practicality when shopping, and this also makes it lightweight and quick to sew. Finally, in terms of design, the Osaka bag offers a number of possible versions. It can be two-tone with contrasting bottom and pockets, three-tone if the bottom is in a third color, or plain and sober with a single canvas color for all the pieces. Cotton wool ribbons and handles can also be tone-on-tone or contrast with the fabrics. The skill level is fairly intermediate. The model presents no real technical difficulty, as there's no lining or zipper. The intermediate level lies in the finishes, which require particular attention to detail. You need to take your time and apply yourself when applying the trim that cover the edges of the pieces. There are few pieces to assemble: a front and a back, pockets and a bottom. Sewing a whole bag takes about 3 hours. As for the fabrics to be used, we recommend strong, medium to heavyweight woven fabrics, approximately 330 to 440 grams per square meter, such as gabardine, canvas, denim, or very thick linens. The look of the bag will depend on the strength of your fabric and straps. I'll show you the results for different qualities and weights. Here, soft jeans in 330 grams per square meter will produce a light, slightly floppy bag. With a compact 340 grams per square meter gabardine, you'll already have a bag with more hold. The same goes for this 330 grams per square meter canvas bag, which has a certain hold. Finally, a heavy 440 grams per square meter canvas will clearly be stiffer, with a good hold. Sewing with this type of canvas is then a little more difficult, as you have to go through the layers. It all depends on the look you're going for and the finish you want. For a completely different look, you can also use a fine polyester fabric for a very light, supple tote bag, which will be very strong and take up very little storage space. A lighter cotton or linen fabric, around 230 grams per square meter, won't be strong enough for an unlined bag, and won't be strong enough to carry groceries for your kitchen. However, you can use it for purposes other than food shopping. For example, the washed linen used here for the placemat, napkin, and tea towel set, as well as for the cross-back apron, is too light for a shopping bag, but is perfectly suitable for a beach bag version, for example. Fabrics can be plain or printed, or woven with checks or ribbons. You could also mix 2 colors, or even 3, one for the front and back, one for the pockets and bottom, or one for the pockets, one for the front and back, and one for the bottom. You'll find all the info you need in the requirements table, which includes plain, 2-tone, and 3-tone options. As for supplies, you'll need 4 meter of 2 centimeters wide cotton wool ribbons and 1 meter of 1 centimeter wide cotton wool ribbons. These ribbons are easily found in haberdasheries, and on our Ikatee site in 3 colors, off-white, black, and navy, are thin and supple and apply very easily. Instead of cotton twill, you can use a bias binding, but it must be thin enough to avoid excess thickness. The bias binding will have 4 layers when folded astride an edge, whereas the cotton wool ribbon has only 2. You'll also need a small snap hook to hang your keys if this is an option you select. Finally, you'll need 3.5 meter of 4 centimeters wide webbing for the handles. Here again, there are more or less flexible straps in cotton or polyester. On our sewn models, we use a cotton strap. For the sewing equipment, the tote bag can be sewn entirely on a conventional sewing machine. No need for a serger, as all seams are enclosed. Of course, for those who like to overcast the pieces on fabrics that fray a little, so as to be able to handle the pieces more easily while sewing. It is possible to overcast them on the serger, like this, or zigzag stitch all around the pieces on the sewing machine. In terms of small sewing equipment, you'll need classic scissors or a rotary cutter to cut the fabric pieces, small precision scissors for finishes, a textile pen or chalk, pins or clips, needles suited to your fabric. I recommend 90, 100 or even 110 gauge universal needles for thicker, heavier fabrics. As an option, you can use a temporary glue stick for textiles, which comes in very handy for attaching cotton wool ribbons. It saves time. Finally, you'll need sewing thread, which I recommend in polyester for its strength. Use a straight stitch for seams, with a 2.5 length stitch for assembly and a 3 length stitch for top stitching. Finally, you'll ideally need a patchwork ruler or a transparent ruler. We've made different versions of the tote bag, which I'm going to present to you now. We start with mine, the maker's natural and khaki canvas tote bag weighing 340 grams per square meter, a medium weight but already heavy enough for a sturdy bag that remains flexible. We've embellished our tote with navy cotton wool ribbons and off-white cotton straps. We also have a similar version in heavy gabardine, off-white and maple with black supplies. We then have another version in heavy gabardine, cobalt and off-white with black twill ribbons and black cotton straps. I added a heart patch from Ikatee that I mounted as a brooch, but it could be sewn directly onto the bag. We sewed a denim version, using the right side and wrong side of the fabric to play with contrasts and give the product a graphic design. I did the same with the inside pocket, using denim on the wrong side. Finally, I sewed a plain version in mine, the maker's 440 grams per square meter thick canvas. A very thick fabric that's more demanding when it comes to sewing because you have to go through the layers. I used 110 gauge needles. We cut our pieces, of which there are only a few. A single piece to cut a front and a back. 2 identical pockets and a bottom. We made sure to transfer the markings on the pockets, the fold markings and the pocket placement markings on the front and back. On the right side of the front, markings for strap positions and pocket stitching, and on the wrong side of the back, markings for inner pocket stitching and strap positions. You can transfer the markings with a textile pen or chalk, or, for markings on piece edges, simply notch the markings in the seam allowances with the tip of the scissors. Finally, transfer the pocket bottom position lines to the right side of the front piece for the outside pocket, and to the wrong side of the back piece for the inside pocket. To do this, use a textile pen or chalk to draw a line 2 centimeters from the bottom edge on the wrong side of the back piece, and a line 2 centimeters from the bottom edge on the right side of the front piece. Now we need to prepare the 2 centimeters wide cotton wool ribbons. We'll simply fold the ribbon in two and iron it all the way through, ready to trim the edges of the pieces. If you're using pre-folded bias binding, then you don't need to do a thing, as your bias binding is already ready. Note that there's no preparation for the 1 centimeter wide cotton wool ribbon, which will be used flat. If you want to attach a keyring, now is the time to prepare it. Cut a 20 centimeters piece of cotton wool ribbon of your choice, either 1 or 2 centimeters wide, or a pre-folded bias binding sewn to the side. Insert one end into the loop of a small carabiner suitable for use as a keyring fastener. Fold the end over 3 centimeters and form a small 1 centimeter tuck, which you stitch in straight stitch with back and forth stitches at the beginning and end of the stitch to hold the carabiner in place. Keep it on hold until the end of the project. We'll now prepare the pockets. We'll cut 2 pieces of 80 centimeters long cotton twill or bias binding ribbons. We'll gimp the upper edge of the pocket, laying the pre-folded cotton twill or bias binding astride this edge and pinning it all along. After starting, it's easier to work flat, tucking the edge of the piece into the fold of the gimp and folding the trim down, then pinning as you go. Once the top is trimmed and pinned, stitch with a tone-on-tone thread 2 or 3 millimeters from the edge of the gimp. Set your machine needle to stitch 2 millimeters from the edge of the cotton twill. Set the folded edge of the gimp along the presser foot and shift the needle 1 or 2 notches to the left. You can stitch the whole length with a 2.5 straight stitch. Start with a few back and forth stitches, stitch along the length, removing the pins as you go, and retighten the gimp a little if it forms small folds before being stitched. Finish with a back and forth stitch at the end. Remove the excess braid at the end. Here's the result on the first braid. Repeat with the other pocket. Place the pocket on the front. Place the wrong side of the pocket on the right side of the front, aligning the side edges together, and then the bottom of the pocket on the line drawn 2 centimeters from the bottom of the front. First pin one side, then the other. Then align the pocket and front stitching marks and pin along. Stitch the sides in the seam allowances at approximately 5 millimeters. Then stitch the 2 central vertical lines along the lines that will hold the pockets and create the compartments. We choose the thread in the color that suits us. Rather tone on tone with the pocket if you have a two-tone product. I use a bobbin thread in the color of my front if I don't want to see the thread contrasting on the inside. Set your stitch to a length of 2.5. We'll start at the top of the pockets and always do a few stitches back and forth at the gimp to solidify the seam, which will be put under a lot of strain during use. Then we'll stitch with a straight stitch and finish with a few stitches back and forth. That's it, stitched. You can see that the threads are tone on the pocket and on the inside with the front. The trace of textile pen will disappear with the heat of the iron. Now it's time to form the pleats at the bottom of the pockets. Fold mark A over mark C, forming a pleat at mark B. We then fold the center markings of the pocket towards the markings closest to the sides of the pocket. I'll show you. Mark towards the center of the pocket and fold it towards the side of my compartment. I pin and make the other fold of the same compartment symmetrical in the other direction. And so on. Once the bottom is fully pinned and the 6 folds formed, 2 per pocket, we can stitch them in place all along the 5 millimeters seam allowances. I did this on my side. Here's the result for the front pocket. We'll repeat for the back pocket, but this time on the wrong side of the back to have inside pockets. All steps repeat except one. There will be an extra step for the inside pockets. Start with the repeating steps. Align the sides together, then the bottom of the pocket with the marked line 2 centimeters from the bottom of the back. Align the stitching lines and stitch. Firm the pleats and stitch. Here's the extra step. When it comes to stitching the bottom of the pocket, there's a special feature for the inside pocket. The bottom seam allowances will have to be gimped flat, as they won't be enclosed or hidden when the bag is assembled, whereas they will be for the bottom of the front pocket. Optionally, the bottom of the pocket margins can be trimmed to clear if they extend beyond the 2 centimeters line. Then, as here, the line is retraced 2 centimeters from the edge. So I'll flat apply a 1 centimeter ribbon of cotton twill 60 centimeters long. Simply lay the ribbon unfolded to cover the seam allowances, apply it just above the bottom line. Then I carefully pin and stitch at 2 millimeters on each side of the ribbon to hold it in place, using coordinating threads. For my part, black for the stitching on the ribbon and off-white for the gabardine. We recommend a 1 centimeter cotton twill ribbon. But it is possible to gimp with a 2 centimeters ribbon straddling the bottom edge, in which case, for a saddle gimp, it must be prepared and saddled before stitching the bottom of the pocket. You could also use a bias binding with an undercut tack to limit thickness. But this depends on the thickness of your fabric. With a thick fabric, the use of thin 1 centimeter gimp is really recommended as it avoids extra thickness. Here's the finish on the bottom of my inside pocket. I still have to trim the excess gimp at the ends. I cut 2 straps 130 centimeters long and 4 centimeters wide for the long handles and 2 other pieces 45 centimeters long for the short handles. Place the straps on the front, then on the back. One end of the long strap is placed 2.2 centimeters from the bottom of the front, slightly above the marked line. The strap covers the pocket compartment stitching on both sides. Pin up to the top of the pocket. At this point, insert the end of the short strap below the long handle, sandwiching it between the long strap and the front from the top of the pocket. Align the 2 straps and pin in the middle. You can also use temporary textile glue to hold the short loop in place. but only up to 4 centimeters from the top edge. I recommend testing the glue beforehand to check that it won't leave a trace on the wrong side. We've pinned. We'll mark a mark with a fabric pen or pin 3 centimeters from the top of the front piece, as it's at 3 centimeters that I'll have to stop my stitching to hold the straps in place. You can stitch from the bottom up, across the strap and then back down to the bottom, always using stop stitches at the beginning and end of the stitch. For the stitching, I check the colors of my threads. I personally use a tone-on-tone thread with the spool strap, in this case black, and a tone-on-tone thread with the front fabric for the bobbin, in this case off-white. I set the length of the straight stitch to 3 and stitch from the bottom of the front piece, always with a few stop stitches. Then progress to the straight stitch 2 millimeters from the edge of the strap, working my way up to stitch through the front piece and the 2 straps, stopping exactly 3 centimeters from the top. I leave the needle planted in the fabric, raise the presser foot, turn the work 90 degrees, lower the presser foot and continue stitching perpendicular to the strap and parallel to the edge of the front piece. Similarly, at the other edge of the straps, I stop 2 millimeters from the edge, replace the needle, lift a foot and repeat the stitching to reposition myself on the edge. I lower the foot and continue stitching all the way to the bottom. For the thicknesses, if you're having trouble getting through the 2 straps, slow down the stitching speed and progress gently. Then proceed in the same way with the other ends of the straps, symmetrical on the front. Position the straps in the same way, starting 2.2 centimeters from the bottom and taking care that they don't twist at the top. Pin the long strap at the bottom and insert the short one from the top of the pocket. Pin everything together and stitch in the same way as before. These are the 2 handles stitched on the front. All that remains is to reinforce the top of the straps with rectangle top stitching and diagonal stitching. You can draw the diagonal and bottom stitching lines just above the pockets with chalk or a heat fade textile pen. I'll show you on the machine. I've already done this on my side, but I'll go back over my top stitching to show you the path of these reinforcement stitches. Start at the bottom with back and forth back stitches, then stitch over the previous seam to the corner. Change direction using the same method as before to go to the other corner. Then rotate the work again to go diagonally, this time with the opposite edge of the strap just above the pocket as the focal point. I progress like this, then at the corner I change direction again to sew down parallel to the pocket. Then I'll do the second diagonal up to the opposite corner and finish with a few stitches back and forth. I could do some more reinforcing top stitching on the sides, but it's not really necessary. The straps can now be mounted in the same way on the right side of the back. Note that the right side of the back is the side without the pocket. Just remember to pin the inside pockets flat to prevent the pocket gussets from getting caught in the webbing seam. Returning to the right side, we'll mark with a textile pen or chalk the location of the top of the pockets, which corresponds to the top of the vertical compartmentalization stitching. This way, we can position the straps as seen above. Here's the result. I've also stitched the reinforcement at the top. On the wrong side, you can see that I've chosen a bobbin thread in the color of the inside pockets. We'll pin the little handles in the middle and continue folding and pinning for 10 centimeters on each side. Finally stitching 2 millimeters from the edge of the edges to hold the fold in place for 20 centimeters, with dots at the beginning and end of the seam. All done. Repeat on the other small handle what I've already done on my side. This way, the little handles form more practical and comfortable handles. We'll now assemble the bottom to the front and back. The bottom is assembled with folded seams. To do this, line up wrong sides together at the bottom of the front, 1 length from the bottom piece. Pin and stitch 2 centimeters from the edge with the front visible under the machine presser foot. Be sure to use a thread that matches the fabric on the bottom for the bobbin, as this stitching on the bottom will be visible when your tote bag is finished. That's it, stitched. We'll slightly trim the bottom of the pockets by about 2 millimeters. Then cut the seam allowances on the front about 1.5 centimeters like this. Now press the seam towards the front and fold in a tuck of about 8 millimeters at the bottom edge. As you go along, check that the folded in margin is even, adjust if necessary, pin and press into place. Top stitch with a straight stitch 2 millimeters from the edge of the bottom piece at a slow speed. There are quite a few thicknesses. When starting the seam, either start a few millimeters from the edge so that your presser foot is already horizontal, or add a shim at the back of the presser foot to raise the back of the foot to keep it straight and allow it to move forward without worry. You could also fold a scrap of fabric over several times to form a small mattress. If you go slowly through the layers, sewing goes smoothly. Start and finish with tacking. You can see that on the front, the bottom of the pocket is covered by the folded seam and the finish is perfect and very solid. Repeat the operation on the back, aligning the bottom wrong side together with the other bottom edge. Pin and stitch at 2 centimeters from the edge. Once stitched, I'm going to trim the seam allowance on the back piece by about 1.5 centimeters to leave just 0.5 centimeter. Press the seam towards the back and fold over 8 millimeters to cover and create a folded over margin. Press again, pin carefully and top stitch 2 millimeters from the edge. Don't forget to choose threads in colors that coordinate with your fabrics. On the spool, the color of the bottom, and on the bobbin, the color of the gimp applied to the bottom of the inside pockets. There's still one thickness more than for the front, as the gimp has been added to neatly cover the seam allowances on the pocket bottoms. I'm showing you the result on the back with the seam folded over and the inside pockets gimped. Here, I can see the bottom of the front fabric folded over very slightly in off-white. Obviously not serious, but I should have checked my folding on the wrong side when ironing before stitching. The next step is to close the sides of the bag. We'll now assemble the sides of the bag by aligning the front and back sides right sides together. We pin the vertical edges up to the bottom flyer release, taking care to align the folded seams on the front and back very well. A pin is added just before and, if necessary, just after the folded seams to hold them in place. Stitch at 1 centimeter using a straight stitch. Repeat on the other side. Start with a back and forth stitch, then progress with a straight stitch. At the top pocket thicknesses, add a folded fabric or a shim so that the presser foot of the machine is horizontal and not rising. This will improve the passage of these layers. I continue, and at the folded seam level, where there are once again quite a few layers to pass through, I adjust the thickness of my shim. This time with folded fabric scraps at the right height. The foot is stabilized and horizontal, allowing me to do my stitching without worry. We finish with a few stitches back and forth. We sewed and repeated on the other side of the bag. Here are the sewn sides. I'm showing you the result at the folded seams, which are well aligned between front and back. If your alignment isn't quite right, I recommend you unmade the seam with a seam ripper and start again. The seam allowances on the side edges are trimmed to 5 millimeters. Cut 2 pieces of 40 centimeters cotton wool gimp 2 centimeters wide. Gimp the edges of these seams by placing the 2 centimeters wide gimp, pre-folded with an iron in 2 and straddling the edge, as before. This will cover the seam, and we carefully pin it in place. Despite the different thicknesses along the edge, the gimp manages to cover the edges and seams. Don't hesitate to use lots of pins. Top stitch at 8 millimeters with threads in tone on tone with the gimp, stopping at the beginning and end of the seam. During sewing, we don't hesitate to reposition the gimp, which can become slightly deformed due to the different thicknesses. To adjust, I use a pin to stretch the gimp slightly to avoid wrinkles, and I progress in this way, removing the pins as I go along to adjust. Now that our side edges are trimmed, we can close the bottom corners and create the volume of the bag. To do this, turn the bag right side out and align the corners with wrong sides together. Notch the corners a few millimeters. The last notch at the bottom will coincide with the side seam, and both ends need to be laid flat. Pin in place, remove any excess gimp thickness and stitch at 7 millimeters. Once stitched, trim the seam allowance to 4 millimeters and turn wrong side out, marking the ends. Carefully press the seam to create a French seam. Pin and top stitch to 1 centimeter. Stop stitch at the beginning and end of the seam. Repeat on the other corner in symmetry. I've already done this on my side. As you can see, the finish is impeccable, with gimping and French seams at the corners. We have to turn the work inside out on the right side and mark the corners with our fingertips, then trim off the protruding threads. All that's left is to gimp the top of the tote to cover the edges and side seams with a ribbon of cotton twill, as shown here, 2 centimeters wide and ironed in 2 along its length, or a pre-folded bias binding. Normally, the pattern is for a 118 centimeters long gimp or bias binding, which includes 2 centimeters seam allowances, 1 centimeter at each end. But I recommend you check on your tote bag. In fact, depending on the seam allowances actually used and the quality of the fabric, which may be slightly slack, as in this case with gabardine, which has a little elasticity, there may be a little play and you may need to use a little more gimp length. So we'll measure with a ribbon measure that will follow the edge all the way around. I start at a side seam and bring the ribbon measure forward, flat against the edge without stretching it. Here I'm measuring 116.5 centimeters plus 2 centimeters margins. So I need 118.5 centimeters of gimp. Align the 2 ends of the open gimp right sides together. Without twisting the gimp, pin the ends and stitch at 1 centimeter. Once stitched, trim off the corners like this on each side of the seam without cutting the seam. Now place the gimp straddling the top edge of the tote. Start by placing the gimp seam at the handles, rather at the front, so that this thickest part is as inconspicuous as possible, and pin the gimp all the way down. When all is pinned, we remove the pin from the other handle in front, to insert the keyring clip under the braid. Replace the pin. This is the best right side to ensure that the keys, which are often a little heavy, hang well along the handle of the bag. On a softer, looser part, the weight of the keys could distort the side of the bag a little. Now that everything is in place, all that's left to do is top stitch all the way around, 2 millimeters from the edge of the gimp, stretching the gimp slightly as you go. It's important to apply the stitching carefully, and to keep the handles apart so as not to catch them in the stitching. I'll show you the result of the gants in place and the key fastener also attached. I'm going to iron again to remove my textile pen markings, which come off in the heat of the iron. All that's left is to cut off any stubborn threads. And that's it, your Osaka tote bag is finished. It's a bit of work, but the result is worth it, as the finishes are really beautiful. You can add badges and labels for decoration if you like. And now your shopping bag is ready to go to the market or to the beach. We hope you'll be pleased with your creation too. If you like this video, please like it and subscribe to our channel. We can't wait to see your versions. So join us on Instagram with #Ikatee Osaka. See you soon at Ikatee.